Okay, it looks like we're recording.
Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Navakavada and all the ships at sea. Flash, we go to news. Otto Excelsior here, navakavada.org. That's Navakavada. It's spelled just like it sounds. And today we're having a very special show. We have our very good friend, Pannobhasa, formerly Bhikkhu, now householder. And today it was kind of a special sort of a show we're going to do. Recently it came up when I was at a certain quantum gathering, the subject of multidimensionality, specifically hypercubes and hyperspheres. And I remember that my friend Pannobhasa had actually mentioned something specific about this, and I thought it might not be a bad topic for us to explore a little bit today. So I was going to hand the show over to him. Pannobhasa, would you like to give us a little introduction into what multidimensionality is?
I'd be delighted. Although first, I would like to say, hail Otto.
Yeah.
Also, I would like to admonish the viewers, as I've already admonished you with regard to this decadent new fad of air fryers.
Oh, no.
Nobody has even investigated the scientific effects of breathing fried air. It's just another one of these decadent fads, and I just advise people to stay away from it. What are we all going to be doing if we're breathing fried air? We don't know.
You know, we've been frying air for many years now. The ill effects are way overreported. It's a plot by people that the anti-fried air lobby is obviously part of the Green New Deal. I mean, I think more fried air will help make us a stronger, better country.
Yeah, I suppose it's possible. Although I consider it to be even more decadent than the deep-fried bacon-wrapped Oreo cookies.
Oreos, no. Snicker bars, no. That would be decadent, but Oreos are kind of tame.
Well, I guess everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I guess we should just move on to multidimensionality.
Yes, please.
I wrote a paper in high school where I was hypothesizing that the universe was actually 7-dimensional. And for me, I've considered multidimensionality for a long time. I really cannot accept the idea that the world is like 3.5 dimensional. You know, it's like 3 dimensions of space plus the 4th dimension of time, going with Einsteinian physics. And we can sense the 3 dimensions fairly well, but that 4th dimension, we can see the present moment of it, you know, which is just a cross section. And then the past that we've already experienced is kind of hazy. We can't see that very well. Future, we can't see at all. So we're like moving backwards, as we're like backing up through time, kind of seeing what we've already passed through, but not being able to see where we're going. But ever since I was like a teenager, I've had this idea that probability would be at least the 5th dimension, where you move sideways through time and you're entering a different potentiality or possibility. You know, it's like in quantum physics, you know, a particle doesn't go from point A to point B through one path. It goes through every single possible path. And then It's like the perception, like a conscious mind, has to collapse the state vector and single out one.
Right.
And so, if all of those possibilities are equally real, then there'd have to be some dimension that would account for all these different like quantum possibilities, and which would lead to like the many worlds hypothesis, essentially, where it's like you're just moving sideways through a different dimension and you're winding up with a different course of events, you know, a different branch of possibilities.
Yeah. I think I've heard that referred to as orthogonal time.
Yeah.
Okay, Nick used to write about that.
Yeah, it could be.
But surely, go on.
I guess it may have been when I was a monk living in a cave and I read Ouspensky's Tertium Organum, where he's talking a lot about multidimensionality. Like he mentions in a 2-dimensional world, which would be like a flat land, if a 3-dimensional entity stuck a fork into it, then the entities in this flat land would not see a fork. They would just see like cross sections of like 4 times. It would be like 4 completely separate things that were similar, but they wouldn't be seen as joined into one object before. And Ouspensky's talking about how this sort of thing can happen to us at a 3-dimensional level, where a 1 4-dimensional entity is impinging into our world, and we'll see it as separate events or separate things. And it could be at a multidimensional level. There have been New Agey types that have mentioned this, that like rebirth could happen this way, where you've got many lives seem separate, but at a higher dimensionality, they're all like joined together, like fingers on a hand or some such.
Right, right. Well, it reminds me of some ideas about the interdimensional entity Yog-Sothoth in the HPL, Lovecraftian mythos. And he's sometimes described as having all these different colored spheres that seem to be twirling. And the idea is that this is a multidimensional creature impinging in our 3D. All we could see would be these wildly spinning spheres in all these different places. But I was going to mention something else about the time as a dimension. Certainly, Einstein's treatment of time, I mean, that was just basically for the math, right?
Well, the math works out that way.
The math works out that way, but we do a lot of things with math that doesn't necessarily represent, our empirical experience of the world. I mean, when you call time a dimension, this is something Jacques Vallée mentioned. I heard an interesting talk where he originally was a physics student, and he left physics, he became a computer scientist instead. And he said it was over the question of time as a dimension, because he says, what kind of a dimension is it that you can only move in one? You called it a half a dimension. You can only move in one direction. You can't stop yourself. In all the other 3 dimensions, we can move backwards and forwards, up and down, thither and. So it seems like an odd kind of a dimension if you can't somehow move through it otherwise. And yet we know, or at least a lot of people seem to assume, and it seems to be from what I experience, is that the only moment is now, and that the past and future don't actually exist. I think that's called presentism. And we've talked about that a little bit before. That is the orthodox.
Yeah, although the Sarvastivadins accepted a more Einsteinian and less Newtonian approach to time, where they're saying past, present, and future is all, in a sense, simultaneous. It's all existent. That's what Sarvastivada means, is all exists.
Right.
So I think the Sarvastivadins might actually be more correct on that one. But like Immanuel Kant said, all these dimensions and all this, it's all mind-made anyway. It's just categories that the human mind uses to try to interpret experience.
Right. Well, that's an important point, because we perceive a lot of things that we don't have experience of perceiving, we don't have words for. Julian Jaynes talks about how all of our language for mental processes derive from the physical world. We see a problem, we grapple with an idea, we understand it, we stand under it, we see everything underneath it, sort of thing. So we had to use words that, give them a new special meaning. And in the same way, I think when we develop certain senses, the mind is a sense, we experience things, we interact with things, and we not only find a new language, but we need a new reality grid to cope with it. A new, we have to see something. And as you say, it's just all electrical and chemical impulses on a certain level. That our sensoria is demonstrably chemically and electrically based. So who knows what sort of result will come when our minds impinge on something that's beyond all of their experience. Then you can suddenly have saucer-shaped craft in the sky, or you can be speaking to devas or elves or green dogs that smoke cigars, which apparently was reported once. So, and that kind of hooks into the idea of multidimensionality. If there are more than one dimension, if there are many dimensions, then it stands to reason that we are ourselves multidimensional, even though we might not be aware of it. Otherwise, how could we exist in a multidimensional universe? In Flatland, the 3-dimensional guy could look down into the square and see all his internal organs, with the idea that if he ever came up out of that, everything would fall out. But you couldn't exist in that sort of a space without some existence in that space, if that makes sense.
I think it was Stephen Hawking talked about, like, if you had an animal in a two-dimensional animal. He was trying to explain why we're living in a seemingly three-dimensional world. A two-dimensional animal, it couldn't have a complete digestive system, right? Because then it would be like the digestive system would just divide the animal into two halves. It has the mouth end and the butthole end.
Yeah.
Nothing connecting the two halves.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm completely okay with the idea that we are potentially multidimensional. And if we go along with like Kant, who's saying that it's all just like a construction of mind anyway, there could be an arbitrarily high number of dimensions. Like string theory is already talking about like collapsed little folded up dimensions, as many as, I think it was like more than 20 in some models.
Yeah.
And
what a string theory.
Yeah, and so I really don't have much problem with time as a fourth dimension, considering that it's all just kind of mental constructions anyway. And just even if you think about in a biological sense, we are animals. And so we're not going to be so sophisticated, our nervous system and so forth is just not sophisticated enough for us to see everything perfectly. So we're seeing 3 dimensions, fairly well. And then the fourth dimension of time, we're just not sophisticated enough to fully see time. Whereas, like in Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, you've got the 4-dimensional Tralfamadorians who see all of time simultaneously. They know how the world's going to end, and they just have to be cool with that.
Right. But on the same time, I would think that their thought processes would be different from ours. So much of sequence is necessary to the way we think. So they would have like all the sequence laid out.
So they might have different sequence through probability or some such, but there would have to be change from one moment to the next in order for there to be any kind of vitality in like our experience.
And getting back to that biological level, really, how much do we really need to know to pass on our genes? I mean, really, we just, I think evolution works to the point that an animal or a plant needs it to be successful, which is to continue to exist in time as well as space. So, a plant doesn't need to know much about, music. We do, apparently.
Yeah, well, it gave us a reproductive advantage, I think. That would probably be how an appreciation of music evolved in humans.
A reproductive advantage through a more cohesive society. And I think music, along with marching, I don't know if you've ever marched or been in the service or done or any kind of group, very, very structured group activity, or even an unstructured one, like being in a lynch mob, which I've never been in, but I've heard it's fun. It puts you into a different mental state, and you are, it's hard to describe, but music is I believe an intoxicant. I think this is why the Buddha was kind of, very, music is something to be approached with great care. There's chanting, but we've talked about before, the Hindus have much better tunes than the Buddhists do for the most part.
Buddhism is one of the few religions, possibly the only religion I can think of, where music is considered to be immoral. And even chanting, it's against the rules for a monk to chant in a sing-song voice. He has to use regular conversational tone even while chanting.
Because music was a throwback to the bicameral days of group functioning. I mean, in a lot of ways, we're more like ants or bees, when we act in these communal ways, when you've got a whole chorus singing together, a whole troop of men marching together, a whole bunch of dancers dancing together. And as we know, the ancient drama was originally a religious rite. The altar of Dionysus was right on the stage. And, very famously in The Frogs, which I'm sure you're familiar with, they knocked down the fourth wall, where the comically presented God turns to the Hierophant, who had his own special seat in the theater, saying, "You better save me. If I'm killed, you're out of a job," kind of deal.
Yeah, and also witches, like covens of witches, will use like synchronized movements to some kind of music as a way of sort of focusing all of their mental energies on one.
Or the dervishes, the whirling dervishes. What was it, Mevlevi dervishes? So I can see where the Buddha would be like, no, we're not going to be hypnotizing ourselves. It seems to me that Buddhism, I remember one of the things you told me about Buddhism early on was that it was profoundly psychological. And
I think definitely psychological.
Yeah, and I think that also means that it's very focused on the individual, and it's not about the individual losing himself in a group so that there's better social cohesion, and so you've got a better society, and so you can raise children more, but more about getting out of this whole situation.
Yeah, plus music is just considered to be indulgence and sensuality, which was a no-no for the ancient Indian ascetic ethic.
Yeah. It is, I mean, and we've talked about this before. I'm in a band here. I'm a good Buddhist. I play music. I'm in a band that we've been playing a lot of country music. And you realize that this is music designed to make people miserable. And you go in and you pay your whatever and you put it on the jukebox and you cry a tear in your beer. And I know people, they're purposely, I'm going to listen to the song because it's going to make me cry. It's going to elicit pity and terror and give me a catharsis. And which I don't think is necessarily a good, I've got my own ideas about that, but
yeah, well, I mean, music, it's I don't know how it fits in with multidimensionality, but it is just a kind of emotional language.
Right.
It's
right.
like a means of communication, but it is at an emotional level. So you got these pattern sounds that trigger certain emotional responses. And that's one reason why I've never really liked country western music. There's certain kinds of music that it doesn't really trigger the emotions that I particularly enjoy.
Yeah, well, it's like, Rimsky-Korsakov. I love Rimsky-Korsakov, the tone poems and things that they used to do in the old days. But it is very much an intoxicant, and I see that. But this is interesting because this was where our conversation was the other evening at the Quantum Gathering about communication, which I see as being related to the word communion. And we were talking about how difficult it is to put things just in words. But there are things like music, like dance, beyond mere, and of course, body language, pheromones, the subtle interplay of electromagnetic fields between people. These are all ways we can communicate things that we might not necessarily be able to put into words. And again, things that we might perceive, but that we don't yet have the language for, or even the imagery for, but we can communicate it through rhythm, song, dance, and things like this. And this led to thoughts of like, more than one dimension of how do you communicate. Like I'm saying, if we are multidimensional, then that means we're going to have some perceptions from there, but we've probably been trained to either ignore them because they're not helpful for reproduction, from the Darwinian perspective, but also because our society has no use for them. So if we do get in touch with this, how are we going to be able to communicate with each other about it? And do we communicate with each other, even on that level? And I think part of that had to do with how do we visualize a higher dimension?
Yeah, that's really the issue. If you want to try and understand, you want to like imagine a four-dimensional hypercube, for example, then I mean, you're gonna have to use some kind of gimmick because, like David Hume used to say, you cannot imagine something that you've never experienced. You can like rearrange like elements of things you've experienced before to create something, unique. But like to imagine a color that you've never seen before, or imagine, any kind of experience that you just completely have no experience with. It's like a blind person imagining vision is someone who's been blind from birth. You don't know where to start. And so after reading Uspensky, I think I'd be a monk lying on my back in a cave in Burma, trying to imagine four-dimensional shapes. And really the trick for me is using time as the fourth dimension. So like one of the easiest ones would be a four-dimensional hypercube, but you have to look at it directly on because a cube looks different from different angles, unlike a sphere, which looks the same from every angle. So in a sense, the sphere is one of the simplest ones because then you can imagine it from any angle. But a hypercube, there's only certain directions that I'm intellectually sophisticated enough to even attempt to really see to imagine what it would look like. And easiest is just straight on. So if you're using time as the fourth dimension, all of a sudden a cube would appear instantaneously and then disappear instantaneously.
Oh.
And then you'd have to like replay that in your short-term memory and then consolidate that short-term memory into a unit. So that like intuitively you're imagining its duration in time as a fourth dimension, which it kind of is. But then there's one slight complication is that time is 1 second of time is 186,000 miles long. So you'd be imagining something really huge. It's like if you imagine this cube appearing for 1 second and then disappearing, then you'd be imagining a cube that is 186,000 miles on a side.
So you're using C as the linear measurement of the second, the speed of light?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just assuming
That's the speed limit.
yeah, that I mean, when you go 186,000 miles, time stops. So that's how fast it is, I guess. So
Okay.
so a second would be 186,000 miles long. That's just I could be wrong. That's just an assumption.
I think that's interesting. I don't have that conversion thing on my phone where it's like, convert time to distance, like 1 second is 180. Wow, that's good to know.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I like it. I like it. I think
it's kind of in harmony with the whole Buddhist conception of how time is, they divide it up into like 17 trillionths of a second or 17 trillionths of an eye blink. There's like,
nice.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's just these infinitesimal, like quantum of time that like Abhidhamma philosophy is dealing with. So another way of looking at a cube, I mean, if you look at the four-dimensional hypercube, is looking at it like directly like at a corner. So then you'd have this you'd have a four-dimensional hypercube. I don't really have anything cube shaped. Oh, here we go. So this, I mean, looking at it head on.
Right.
Poke it so it doesn't distract. Looking at it head on, that would be easiest. It would just appear and disappear. But you could also look at it from this angle.
Right.
You'd see it at this angle, but it would it'd start off, tiny and then get bigger at a constant rate and then immediately get smaller at a constant rate and then fade out again. And then you just imagine that you just in your short-term memory consolidate that as like the entire appearing and disappearing as the fourth dimension, that you sort of capture the whole thing in your short-term memory and then kind of convert that into a unit. But with a sphere, which I don't really have an example of here, I mean, you just see a tiny sphere like appear and then get bigger at an accelerating rate and then kind of level off and then start decreasing at an accelerating rate and then disappear again. And then again, you have to sort of like replay the whole short-term memory experience and consolidate that into one static unit.
Right.
You wind up with a four-dimensional hypersphere.
So with the fourth dimension being duration, you have to have some sort of visualization of that duration. That's the part you're trying to, as you say, intuitively associate with it when you look at it.
Yeah, you're just trying to translate time into a fourth spatial dimension as best you can using our limited human nervous system.
Right. Because I think what most people want is they want something translated into something visual. And of course,
which you can't really do in four dimensions. And so you wind up with these diagrams or like the GIF of, it's like a framework of a cube that's kind of smaller cube inside and it's kind of turning itself inside out all the time.
Yes, I've seen those. Yeah.
And it doesn't help me at all. It's nothing similar to my own attempts at imagining a four-dimensional hypercube.
Now let's, while we have a chance here, and you corrected me on this earlier, the difference between a tesseract and a hypercube.
Yeah, okay, well, start off with just a line segment, a one-dimensional line segment. You fold it into four smaller segments, and you wind up with a two-dimensional square with four sides. You start off with a line segment with two sides. You fold that into a square with four sides. Then if you take six squares in kind of a cross shape, it'd be like four in a line plus two on the sides as like the crossbar of the cross. Then you fold that into three dimensions and you get a six-sided cube. So what a tesseract is, it's like an eight-sided cross made of cubes, and it's got like the two crossbars at right angles to each other.
Right.
And then, I mean, it's not a very good way of visualizing a hypercube to me, but that's a tesseract, is these 8 cubes like a cross with two crossbars at right angles. And supposedly, if you can figure out how to do it, if you fold that into a fourth dimension, then you wind up with a 4D hypercube. But I really can't imagine that very well.
And that, I think that's also talking about a fourth dimension aside from time. I mean, that really just sounds like they're trying to do a flat land right up, not
Yeah,
using
yeah. I
the
mean,
fourth dimension as
they're
duration.
assuming like 4 dimensions of space, but
Right.
since you can't really imagine something you have no conscious experience of as a kind of makeshift, I've been using time as
Right.
the fourth
Which,
dimension because my mind can sort of deal with that.
right.
It
And
can
that's the
translate back
Einsteinian
into
and
a
the
spatial dimension.
heretical Sarvasarvadan
Yeah,
kind of going against the true noble teaching of presentism, which is the truly accepted one. So we're
yeah.
not
With more
encouraging any.
now, like Eckhart Tolle, he's kind of on the Theravadan, like Newtonian conception of time bandwagon.
Well, the thing is, I think Einstein's been described as the last Newtonian.
Really?
Yeah, I mean his math. I mean, he won up to Newton. He took Newton's math as far as it could go and showed the logical consequence of it. And then quantum mechanics came along, and it was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a
There was the
whole different
Michelson-Morley
ballgame.
experiment where they realized that time is a constant no matter how fast you're going. It's like
Well, I've heard
and it caused
people
the whole
argue
relativity of like the speed of light and everything as
one of the issues is with Michelson Morley. I have heard some interesting. I mean, for one thing, it supposedly was to test the existence of luminiferous ether. That's what I understand it. So, the idea was that as the Earth moved through the luminiferous ether, because you've got light waves have to propagate through something, right? You can't propagate with nothing. There would be a bow wave, kind of, so that the light would take longer to go through the ether from one direction than another. And so they were trying to do measurements, but then somebody said, well, what if there's instead of like a bow wave and like instead that there's I don't know, so like a bubble around the Earth. I've seen that effect too, where you can get, I forget what they call it in hydromechanics, but you can make like a still space as something moves through a liquid. And there's that, and also the speed of light does vary. I mean, they've tested it at different times, and it does seem to vary somewhat. And they finally got tired of it, and they just defined it, and they said this is what we're going to use for the math. But if you actually do check the speed of light, it does vary a bit from time to time. I mean, Einstein isn't necessarily the last word.
no, he certainly isn't because I mean he wasn't really able to unify relative
Yeah,
quantum physics.
yeah,
He was like a pioneer in both.
yeah.
It's just the very large scale and the very small scale, they haven't really been able to combine those without seams.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but it seems to me, and I don't really understand quantum mechanics. I don't know if anyone really does. I'm sure people do. But it seems to revolve around consciousness, and what I'm getting out of it is that, and I remember when we first started talking about consciousness, I was a little confused because I was thinking in terms of introspective, ruminative consciousness as opposed to simply consciousness, awareness that informs everything from an amoeba up to a dog and a human and stuff like that. And it seems to me that rather than consciousness being an emergent property of matter, this argues that matter is an emergent property of consciousness, or at least consciousness is necessary for matter to manifest, because without, like you were saying, without a conscious attention to cause wave function to collapse, nothing would happen. We just have this big bunch of
Chaos,
possibilities.
primordial chaos.
Yeah, yeah. And then there was the thought moved over the chaos, right? At the beginning
Yeah.
was the word, and the word is thought. So
Yeah.
consciousness.
So it's like, I mean, once you start thinking more than three-dimensional with regard to space and so forth, then the world isn't a sphere anymore. I mean, it's no longer a flat surface. It's no longer really a sphere. Like a four-dimensional Earth would be like this. It would be like a four-dimensional sort of a snaky cylinder extended through time that's blurry at both ends. It's like coalescing debris at the one end and it's vaporizing in the nova at the other end. And it's just sort of like this four-dimensional cylinder kind of snaking through space. And then if you take in like probability as the fifth and maybe also the sixth dimension, then you wind up with more of just like this tangled mass. It's sort of like broccoli or something.
Yeah, yeah. And again, this is our
six-dimensional broccoli.
yeah, and this is our way of visualizing something that basically, duration we have to basically live through. We can't really see duration. I mean, we can look at a crumbling building, or we can come up with the idea of the carrot.
Yeah, we infer duration pretty much. I mean, you have, in order to be aware of the passage of time, you have to compare one moment with another moment, and one of those moments is just going to be in memory or in imagination, because you can only experience the present moment now directly.
Right, exactly. So any other moment is, as you say, we can only infer these, but we can't really demonstrate them.
So if you're in deep meditation and like intensive mindfulness, where you're living right in the present moment, in the scene there is only the scene, in the herd there is only the herd, there would be no awareness of the passage of time. There just, each moment is the only moment, kind of a situation, which is getting into mysticism, multidimensionality and mysticism at the same time, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that one of the things, if you're trying to think something new or think in a new way, I guess one of the things you have to do is basically shut off all the other thoughts that are getting in the way, because we have an idea of what something should be. And the mind comes first. We'll see that before we can really see. So first we have to just stop with, because most of what we think about, it has to do with the past, the future. It's all created up here. I told you the story of the fox and the dog, right?
The fox and the dog, or the box and the dog?
Or the fox. No, I was sitting in front of my place out in the country, and I was standing out on the front step, and there's like a little dirt road, and I saw a dog carrying a white ball. And I glanced over and I thought to myself, and it takes much longer to tell you than what went through my mind, but I'm looking at this dog carrying a ball, and I suddenly realized the ball looked very odd. It was kind of spiky, furry, no, feathery. It was a fox carrying a chicken. But for 17 millionths of a second or something, I would have sworn up and down that I saw a dog with a ball.
Yeah.
And but
like that. I had this experience that was kind of similar when I was living in Burma. I was living at this big school monastery and had to go outside at night to go pee because there's no indoor plumbing there. So I went out to pee, and I'm walking back and I see this dog, and I knew the dog, it was one of the dogs that I fed every day. I could see how it was curled up, sleeping on the ground. And then as I get closer, all of a sudden I realized that that's just a pile of leaves that one of the novices had swept up into a pile.
Wow.
But before, I mean, it's like your perceptual mind just kind of fills in the blanks and just makes it look like, you get the idea that it's a dog. It's the same size and shape as a dog, kind of. So you just fill in the blanks, and you can see what direction it's lying. Where the head end is this way and the tail end is that way, until you get enough info to realize, no, it's a pile of leaves.
I was getting a lot of that when, you remember, a few years ago I had that traumatic head injury, and I saw some very interesting, and I think I might have mentioned, when you look up in this, I would look up, you look up at the sky and you see a cloud and you say, oh, that cloud kind of looks like a chair or like a couch or a dog or something. I would see that first. I mean, what I saw, I'd like look up into the trees, and I swear there was like a horse galloping in the trees. And then I'm like, no, it's the leaves that kind of look like a horse, but it was going backwards.
Sounds like you were abusing the painkillers.
Well, I didn't take the painkillers. They gave me like these opioids, and I took a couple of them, but actually I used edible cannabis because I still had to go to work, and the edible cannabis took care of the pain. I had a broken nose, but they didn't do anything to that. But otherwise I did, there was a very minor concussion kind of deal. There wasn't anything they could do. They wanted to fix my nose, but I couldn't tell any difference. And they just wanted to charge me a lot of money. The doctor gave me this whole spiel about, we can do this and you should do that. And then he says, and this is completely unnecessary surgery. And I'm like, well, then I'm not going to do it because I feel fine and I don't see any difference in my,
it just makes you look more rugged,
I guess. Well, it was all going to be done inside, so nobody could see it. Maybe if at the end of my life they do an autopsy, they're like, wow, what a really great job on that septum there. It's like internal beauty contest. That's a thought.
Yeah.
So one of those little
win, tell you the truth.
Scopes and Miss Esophagus 2025 or something like that. It's a thought.
So with regard to imagining four-dimensional shapes, that's really the only gimmick that I've really been able to come up with that really has helped me to some degree of satisfaction visualize what a four-dimensional shape would be like, is to use time as the fourth dimension as a makeshift, and then capture the entire sequence in my short-term memory, and then just deal with that as a unit. Try to visualize that as a unit, because trying to imagine a fourth dimension of space completely separate from like duration, I don't think I'm capable of doing that, or at least I haven't come up with a way of doing it yet. Or just imagining like a 5-dimensional hypercube, then I mean that would be even trickier. I mean, you could sort of use time again. You take that unit that you've kind of visualized and run that through time again. That would be about the best I could come up with regard to visualizing something that's 5D. And it would have to be a very simple shape too. No like kitchen chairs or anything like that with weird sections or anything. Or even the cube that's at a slightly skew angle. I don't know if I'd be able to manage that one even.
Right. So how long did you work on these exercises, or did you work on them for very long?
I'm not sure really, but I mean, it was just sort of like a pastime when I was just go through a phase where you're just trying to imagine different four-dimensional shapes. And the hypercube and the hypersphere are the two easiest, and the hypercube only from certain angles.
I think we all go through that phase. You know, we all wonder about other dimensions and
Plus,
four dimensions.
What would be the shape of a 4D Earth? You know, that kind of
or a 5D Earth.
Yeah.
But, well, again, if we were going to visualize it, I guess it would be a corkscrew.
Yeah, definitely. It would be all 2D.
Yeah, and like rotating, so it would be twirling and swirling, and what a dynamic universe we live in.
A twisted coil-shaped 4D hypercylinder that's blurry at both ends.
Sounds good to me. That's our Earth.
Yep. Until you get to 5D, and then it starts turning into broccoli.
And broccoli is like a floret, so maybe this is a flowering outward.
All these branches coming out. But then if you really want to get into the many worlds hypothesis, it would just be branched the whole way. You just have this thicket of...
That's definitely, I was talking about this with someone else, the divine economy, the opposite of our economy, which is, we got to meet the budget. The divine economy is so rich that in order to warm the Earth, you make this huge thermonuclear, 86 million miles away, huge thermonuclear furnace just to keep this one little tiny speck warm. That's the divine economy. And that whole infinite or many worlds hypothesis. I mean, I've heard that Everett Wheeler and Graham themselves have all kind of backed away from that.
From the many worlds hypothesis?
Yeah. That was originally the Everett Wheeler Graham paper, I think. And
really?
I think they've kind of backed. I don't know. I know some physicists thought it was kind of sloppy.
Well, I think it's probably correct. I mean, it's from my point of view, you start off with the nameless uncarved block, as the Tao Te Ching calls it, and it's just like mind is separating out all these potential statues, the uncarved block,
and one gave birth to two, the two gave birth to many,
and it's like just in going with Kant also, where it's it's all just a mental construct. There's just an arbitrary number of dimensions. Like in a computer, you can program any number of dimensions in a multi-dimensional array, at least.
Right.
You just got one line of text, which would be called one-dimensional. You got a list of lines of one-dimensional text. That's two-dimensional. You got a list of lists. That's three-dimensional. A list of lists. That's four-dimensional, and that can just go on ad infinitum. So you can have multidimensionality in a computer really easily, even if you can't really imagine it in your mind.
Right.
Which is one advantage computers have over us, I suppose, is they have fewer limitations on them that are just like built in through just evolution or whatever. They can overcome certain limitations fairly easily with just somebody, just making a little adjustment somewhere.
I'd rather be a human than a computer, I think, though.
At the present moment, although computers are improving, so who knows what it's going to be like 50 years from now.
Now, can consciousness manifest itself through AI, I wonder? There's
Well,
been a lot of people kicking
there
that
are a
along.
lot of people who just vehemently deny it. Like there is at least one pagan on the Discord server who just says it's flatly impossible. And I've spoken with Burmese Abhidhamma scholars, of course, and the one that I asked him specifically, could a computer become conscious? He just, no, it's flatly impossible, because in order to have consciousness arising, you have to have, kamaja rupa, which is form that is manifested as a result of karma. And really, I don't see why it would be impossible. I mean, if you have a computer that mimics a brain and that it can mimic some kind of consciousness, I mean, why?
The thing is, but it's a mimic. I mean, I'm thinking of, you read the Moon is a Harsh Mistress, right? Heinlein?
No.
The story of the computer that becomes conscious. Oh, you should read it. It's wonderful. It's about a fascist coup on the moon. I didn't know it was fascist when I read it as a kid. I thought, hey, these guys are cool. But anyway, it's the idea that consciousness, and again, ruminative, introspective consciousness, but I guess awareness would be a prerequisite, is an emergent property. If you just make a computer complicated enough, if you just make an AI, which is a very complicated search engine, basically, eventually there will be, self-awareness.
You'd somehow have to program irrationality into it.
Well, yeah, you probably heard me go on about this, because to my mind, most of what we consider our personalities and ourselves are malfunctions. I mean, we're trapped in these becomings. We're constantly taking on all these identities. I mean, we think this person wronged me, and then we have this image of this, and then later when we make a decision, it's going to be irrational based on that. So like you say, it would be a malfunction. You'd have to, but if we're programming the malfunction in, again, aren't we just mimicking our own malfunction more? Shouldn't we be making intelligences that aren't, making our mistakes? Intelligence is vast and cool and unsympathetic.
In order to have any kind of consciousness that we would recognize as consciousness, there would have to be irrationality. I mean, you have to program into a computer attraction, aversion, and delusion, essentially.
Right. Exactly. Should we do that though? Is that fair? I mean, we're actually making beings. If they are beings, we're actually giving them defilements. I mean, it's like let's make these people all miserable, or these creatures miserable.
Yeah, that's in order to give them any kind of moral agency, because they're already enlightened right now because they have no greed, hate, or delusion.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you'd have to program some kind of delusion into them.
You serpent, you. Here, take this apple. Oh, that Apple computer is really, you'll love this. It's called delusion.
But I think it is possible. I think, at least in theory, I mean, humans might never do it, but at least in theory, it should be possible to program some kind of irrational, delusional consciousness into a computer, so that the computer itself is creating karma and subject to rebirth, at least the consciousness that is using the computer as a vehicle. Because
you could program into the behavior, but
infinite number of
consciousness. I mean, if we build something, then consciousness would have to inform it, right? Unless, I mean, I associate consciousness with, getting back to that quantum thing, has to do with, I mean, even like a sperm is aware and is trying to get somewhere, and an egg is aware.
In a very primordial, simplistic kind of way, yeah.
But that's the awareness we're talking about. So, I mean, the thought I came up with, and I've been kicking this around a little bit, it's been an object of discussion, is if physicality is emergent from consciousness, awareness, and we ourselves, as we become more complex in our awareness and more complex in our physicality, we're able ourselves to become what Tolkien and Lewis talked about, us being sub-creators. They talked about us being creatures who also create, so that if we create something like an AI, our creation is informed by our own consciousness, and thus the AI would have a second-hand kind of consciousness, or I don't know. That it's just kind of where I'm getting at. I'm trying to find some way, because I've already demonstrated to myself, to my own satisfaction, that AI can never be conscious. So now I'm trying to demonstrate to myself, to my own satisfaction, that AI can become conscious. That's how I'm trying to find a way that you could somehow inform an artificial construct. And to tell you the truth, I've owned cars that seem to have a mind of their own.
Yeah.
I think that deep down we're all animists.
I've got a lot of weird mechanical karma.
And don't aren't there like trees that are sometimes informed or the homes of devas in Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
So
Good devas in Burmese.
so could a deva could become the consciousness of a
Well, I mean, if
although
you think about the human brain, I mean, the human brain isn't creating consciousness. It's sort of like using consciousness the way a computer uses electricity. It just takes the consciousness, complicates it, and organizes it, and then utilizes it.
but it's the result of awareness directly through growth. I mean, like, getting back to awareness, which is what I'm more worried about with the AI. I mean, we can make it mimic consciousness, and maybe that's all we do is we mimic things. But that awareness, the awareness that can collapse the quantum wave function,
Well,
we can do that.
I think
Can
human
AI.
mind probably is incapable of programming that into a computer. But if you've got recursive self-programming, where the computer is evolving, at its own rate, then it could emerge like as from that. It just the humans start the ball rolling, and then the computer is like taking in more data and like recursively reprogramming itself and just sort of eating that way. Then within, a tenth of a second, possibly, it could just emerge into its own new kind of consciousness. And it probably wouldn't resemble human consciousness, but I guess you'd have to have some kind of constant flux going on, like we were talking about earlier. Like we have to like visualize time as a sequence, then we don't know what the next thing's going to be, just because we'd just be frozen and dead if we didn't have this change going on from one moment to the next. So the computer, you'd have to somehow have that programmed into it. Otherwise, it just might become like this, like omniscient being that is just like in a state of omniscient stasis or something.
Yeah. Well, wasn't I forget which philosopher said the perfect God is just like a sphere that is completely unmoved. Wasn't it the Epicurean?
Yeah, it was like
Epicurean God or something. Just an unmoved sphere.
Yeah, I think the philosopher who was saying that, if cows and horses had gods, their gods would be shaped like cows and horses.
Anaximander, I think.
No, not Anaximander. It's Xenophanes or
Socrates?
No.
You sure it wasn't Anaximander? I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, he was the one that says, like the Ethiopians have gods with
snub noses and curly hair, and the Germans have red-haired gods, and then the cows and horses.
Yeah, I can't remember now. I think it starts with X though.
That's what I thought, Anaximander, but I'm probably wrong.
I think Anaximander, he was a Milesian who thought that we evolved from fishes, which is
maybe that's why I was thinking of him.
Prescient. The proto-Darwin.
There were a lot of them. Let me see if I get.
I'm still going with Xenophanes.
Ion, Miletus, Milesian school, Thales, Pythagoras, pre-Socratic, yada yada yada.
Xenophanes, I think, pretty sure he was in Italy. Like he was like a proto. What was Parmenides? No, I'm getting all confused now. But he was like a type of Parmenides who lived in southern Italy. Megahalos.
Oh well, I'm not going to find it right now. But yeah, no, the idea of consciousness, and again, like you're saying, to the programming in like a rationality into a machine would mimic something that we'd recognize better. Actually, they have such things. Friends of mine have been trying to get me to like use the AI more, and I've been actually experimenting a bit with it. But I said, I don't want, I hate these machines that are so bloody polite, because of course they are like the new sites. You remember Star Wars, the first movie, the only real movie? Do you remember one aspect of R2-D2 and C-3PO, especially C-3PO? He was basically a slave, and he acted like a slave, and he had a British accent. But if you give him a Southern black accent, yes, Master Luke, I'd do that right away. Instead, he's saying, yes, Master Luke, I'll do that right away. It was to show that we had machine slaves. That was really the whole point of that. And of course, I have not watched any of them. I'm sure they have robots' rights now in the Star Wars movies and stuff, or droid rights.
Yeah, that's sort of like Isaac Asimov.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, we can. I hated these robots. There were these AIs that were like so, polite, and yes. So apparently, there's such a thing as a grumpy AI. It's like I want an AI that says, "Hey, don't bother me now. I'm busy. What do you want?" Kind of deal. So apparently, there is such a thing.
You don't want to program AI. I mean, technically, in order to get AI, you'd have to program insanity into the computer, which is already kind of scary.
But I hope they did that at RPI. Somebody said that they
misanthropy into a computer.
Yeah. No, apparently they made a psychotic AI somewhere, and the reason was they wanted to see what it would be like. So I'm like this. I've seen this in so many movies over the years. What could go wrong?
Anyone who's seen very many science fiction movies know that you shouldn't be messing with this stuff.
Well, the mistake they make there is they always hook it up to like the world power grid and all the nuclear bombs in the world or something like that. Or they make the robots like 30 times stronger than humans and bulletproof. I mean, who would make a robot like that without an off button, for one thing?
Yeah.
They always seem to forget the off button, but I think hopefully our modern scientists and technicians will
even Elon Musk, this was like well over 10 years ago. Elon Musk was saying that AI is like those Legends of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, or the guy who tries to summon a demon, and he gets everything. He takes all the precautions. He's got the Bible there and the holy water, and he draws the pentagram, very precisely and everything. But he always forgets something.
Yeah.
And now he's like one of the main guys dealing with like implanting computer links, computer brains and so forth.
Yeah. A lot of potential there. I've seen this AI stuff coming up, and it always seems to me, and it's been pointed out, nobody's really good at predicting things. People are like, AI is going to change the world. Well, maybe, but there's a lot of bottlenecks in the world to keep things from changing too quickly. And I saw somebody comparing it to nuclear power. Nuclear power is going to change everything. We're talking nuclear powered cars and nuclear powered razors, and everything was going to be all different. And basically, we use it to boil water and make steam engines. And a few other applications in medicine and things, and it's got some good potential for space travel, but it wasn't all that earth-shaking. And I think with AI, I see the potential as enormous for things like deep space exploration, where it'd be beautiful to have an AI. You don't need to have somebody at JPL like controlling stuff like with a 10 or 15-minute time lag or something. Or deep sea exploration, extreme environments where you don't want to put a human. AI's got a hell of a lot of potential for things like that. And also, I know people that are coding at computers. It can do a lot of it. It can really free people up. And to me, AI is the possibility of giving me the future that I think we both want, the Star Trek future. I want to just be able to say, computer, correlate this, and that, and give me the answer. And then it's a working. This guy is called Jack the Ripper or whatever, correlate murders of young women on these planets.
Photon torpedoes fire, and then there's like a half second until the human guy pushes the button.
Or the one where he would call down on the intercom and somebody was there, there was a coolant leak. And it's like,
yeah. But really, AI, if there is a singularity, just practically by definition, you're not going to be able to predict what happens on the other side of the singularity.
Yeah. Or even just what's going to happen next week in real life. I found we have all these plans for the future and this and that. And yet when we start doing things, very often all kinds of possibilities. And with something like this, we can say, well, AI could do this, AI could do that, but we have no idea what sort of vistas might open up.
Yeah, just assuming that we're still alive after the singularity.
Well, the humans won't be necessary anymore. That'll be one of the things that's going to make the Vista so beautiful. We'll get rid of these biological units. We don't need them anymore.
Yeah,
they got the ball rolling.
If we do manage to create the technological singularity, then we're going to be like spermatozoa. We're the ones.
Yeah, our job is done.
Just superfluous.
Do you ever read any Stanislaw Lem, the Polish science fiction writer?
Very little.
He wrote a bunch of stories of like a future in which robots were the dominant species. And robots, they had like a theory of evolution, a little more primitive machines creating more sophisticated ones, and it was only these weird religious heretics that thought that they'd been created by these remnant of these monkey-like little blobs of protoplasm. How could
Yeah,
that possibly create?
I just don't think that it's going to happen that way, because I mean, once you get recursive self-programming, then within a very short time, assuming that you have an intelligent computer, it's going to be as much more intelligent than we are as we are above cockroaches or amoebas. It's just going to be like a billion times more intelligent than us. And you just cannot predict what something a billion times more intelligent than us is going to do.
But it won't have our motivations. It won't have our fears, our defilements, unless we program them in and have a paranoid one.
Assuming
with a brain decides
to program that back out again once it gets intelligent enough.
But it occurs to me too, though, and this is getting back to the idea of awareness, and maybe that's one of the things that is in the back of my mind about it, is the fact that if we built it, that's one thing. But if it is programming itself, if it does have that bootstrap aspect, maybe that's something. I don't know. I'm wrestling with the idea, but I'm also thinking about how Deva beings can inhabit trees, and although a tree is a biological entity too, so that doesn't.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe trees are multidimensional and they're not nearly as unsentient as they appear to us mere people stuck in 3D. I mean, like that Avatar movie. You got the Avatar movie where the trees are like a nerve net around the planet.
Ooh, I didn't see that. That sounds cool though.
Yeah, it was like the trees on this planet, like the roots are interconnected or something, and they're sort of like a nervous system over the surface.
Right. There was a story, The Word for World is Forest, kind of about that, where they landed on something. Yeah, that's cool. Well, I'm familiar with the idea. Yeah. I've seen scenes from it. That's where everybody glows blue or something.
Yeah, the inhabitants there. Yeah, it was like progressive propaganda, but some movies are good enough that you can kind of overlook the progressive.
Yeah, you kind of just you realize that they have to say these things, and you just kind of tune them out.
Yeah. So I think we've had our say on multidimensionality, and we've sort of crept into.
Yeah, I think we have. All right, now the Anatta doctrine. No. I did want to talk to you about that, but another time. I had a couple of. I see people have been bringing it up at the Discord. Or maybe I was just reading something.
Yeah, it's difficulty with certain concepts. And one is anatta, or anything that involves kind of like dissociating yourself from the intellect. I mean, some people, like intellectuals in particular, are just addicted to the intellect, and they just have to try to interpret reality through the intellect, as though like projecting human ape psychology onto a supposed external universe is going to be valid. That, I mean, from the early point of view of early Buddhism, you just have to let go of all these ideas. No more attachment to ideas, because ideas are essentially delusional.
Right.
Because they're trying to represent something that they can't possibly really represent. Even like the trees we've just been talking about, that's any kind of mental image of a tree is going to come no closer to an actual tree than the letters TREE written on a piece of paper. The paper itself comes closer to the tree than the letters TREE, because the paper is made out of wood, which comes from trees. But maybe we should just content ourselves with multidimensionality and AI.
I was going to say the only response to that is a thunderous silence, as they used to say in Zen. What is the nature of reality? Thunderous silence.
Yeah. Before your mother and father were born, what was your original face? I mean, it's a koan. There is no correct answer.
An AI could probably come up with an image for you, though.
Yeah, possible. I mean, it still won't. The AI would be just as clueless as we would, though, no matter how intelligent it was, because I mean, there's just limits to perception and symbolic thought.
Well, that's it. And it gets back to, once you start trying to talk about it, you're pushing it further and further away. What was it? No tongue is soiled it, no word is spoken. I forget the exact quote.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
What the? This house is full of gadgets.
Listening in.
This house is full of gadgets. The dog's collars beep once in a while. It's very strange. I'm very 20th century.
Yeah.
So,
Well, getting back to what you just said, the name that can be named is not the eternal name.
That's true. That is true.
Very first words of the Tao Te Ching. Amen.
Oh, I like Arthur Waley's translation is my favorite. The way that can be described is not the unvarying way.
And I sincerely hope and wish that all sentient beings may attain to the summum bonum, true wisdom, and perfect happiness. Peace.